We've got the first part of the meeting is going to be focused on projects that are really kind of great examples of data visualization for animal movement. And the second part is going to be platforms and tools. So sort of an exhibition of things that are available for you all to try to share your animal movement stories with a broader audience. And this is also the first time we're really opening our quarterly meeting to the general public. So welcome those of you that have not been to Movement of Life meeting before. We're kind of testing this out to see if we might want to keep our meetings more open in the future. So we really welcome, the reason we've kept it small is because it's kind of, we like to encourage interaction with the speakers. And sometimes it's hard to do that with a big group, but the broad appeal of this topic really motivated me to say, let's invite more people. And we also are always interested in building our network, and there's lots of familiar faces and names on here. So just happy to have you guys in the meeting. We welcome questions in the chat. Jared is going to be helping me monitor that. So as people are speaking, you can type a question in there. You can also raise your hand after they're finished speaking and just ask verbally. We will do our best to manage all of that. And so there'll be an opportunity to ask questions after every speaker, and then also a group Q&A at the end. So any questions before we get going? Okay, well, I'm just going to kick us off with a really quick overview of Movement of Life, just because there are some folks on here who may have never heard of us. So let me share my screen. Jared, can you help? Are you able to let people into the waiting room?
Yeah, I'm monitoring that for you, so perfect. Don't worry about that.
Okay, and can you guys see the screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, great. So Movement of Life is a pan-institutional initiative, which means we incorporate scientists from all across all Smithsonian units and research centers. But our kind of core representation comes from three main centers: the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in Edgewater, Maryland, the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama, and the Smithsonian National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute, which is based in DC for the zoo, and then out in Front Royal, Virginia for the Conservation Biology Institute. And that means we have people working across all land, air, and sea, multiple taxa. And we have a globally distributed research network, which includes field stations and partner projects around the world. This is not a comprehensive map. Primarily missing many of our bird projects, which are in separate maps we're going to share soon. But the other kind of fun bit of this position is that I've been able to do some research into the history of animal tracking at Smithsonian, which is actually kind of deeper than any of us really knew when we started out. And a couple of highlights there are the Paul Barch, who was the first person to systematically ban birds in North America. He did that out of the National Zoo. There's the Pacific Ocean Biological Survey, which tagged over 2 million birds and revealed the connectivity of seabird populations for the first time. And Tuck Hines' ultrasonic telemetry project out at CERC on blue crabs was one of the first studies, ultrasonic telemetry studies of blue crabs. And then Monique the space elk, who has gotten a lot of media attention in the last couple years, I'd say. But Smithsonian scientists actually helped design her crazy collar there. And there's some fun podcasts and social media content around that story. If anyone would like to look it up, it's the Airspace podcast. Today we have a leadership team that consists of Chris Fleming, Autumn Lynn Harrison, myself, Peter Leimgruber, Matt Ogburn, Melissa Songer, and Jared Staubach. These are all leads based at various Smithsonian research institutes. Although I will say that Chris recently became a knight at University of Central Florida and has since left Smithsonian, but we're still working closely with him. Our research revolves around some core questions that are primarily have applied conservation focus, such as how much space do animals need to survive, how do anthropogenic barriers influence access to critical resources, and how will predicted changes in animal movement affect established social ecological systems, as well as what methodological advancements are needed to answer these questions for most species. And a unique resource that we have here at Smithsonian is our captive collection of animals. And this picture is a maned wolf with a heart rate monitor shown there, in where we're experimentally implanting heart rate monitors to start linking physiology with movement parameters. We also have an extensive reintroduction program affiliated with the National Zoo, and you're going to hear more about the scimitar horned oryx introduction in just a minute. We also have many large collaborative research collectives where we're stewarding big data for conservation, including the Atlantic Cooperative Telemetry Network, the Migratory Connectivity Project, and the Shorebird Science and Conservation Collective. We also have internships and training programs for anyone on the call maybe looking for these experiences. We have both coursework, paid internships, and fellowships at graduate and postdoctoral levels. And we do those through partnerships with universities really around the world. So I'm happy to talk to you if this might be of interest. And then, of course, the Smithsonian is the world's largest education and research complex. And we have, as such, we have an amazing platform for really sharing stories about the power of animal movement and engaging a broad audience. So there's been some fun projects here in the past. There's also the birdhouse, which recently opened at the National Zoo, featuring lots of work on migratory birds, and the One World Connected exhibit at the National Air and Space Museum, featuring Autumn Lynn Harrison, if you want to go see her photo in the Air and Space Museum. And with that, I am going to get back to our agenda and run through a couple of announcements here. 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to drop this agenda in the chat for anyone that doesn't have it yet. Man, okay, it's not going to let me actually. So I will at least share it around after the meeting. The main thing that I want you guys to have it for is that there's links in there to all of these things I'm talking about. So the first one is that the December issue of the Transmitter is out. So that's our roughly monthly newsletter that talks about animal tracking work across Smithsonian and our broader network. There's also a mentorship opportunity for Smithsonian scientists to mentor master students at University of Glasgow. Thanks, Kim. Kim just posted a link to the Transmitter in there. And that's part of an ongoing partnership with their program, with the IBOCM Institute, Biodiversity, Animal Health, and Conservation. I'm sorry, Glasgow, if you're on here. Well, it's an ongoing partnership that we are. You can share data with Glasgow students and and co-mentor with Glasgow advisors. We also have, let's see, Matt, do you want to hop on and talk about the Minorities in Shark Science internship program?
Yes. Yeah. So we have for some of our shark and stingray migration research, we've developed a new partnership for this coming year with a group called Minorities in Shark Science. And I'll put the link in the chat in just a minute, but they were hosting one of their fellows or interns at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center this coming summer. And they're searching, the applications are open for those right now. So I just put that in the chat. And the mentor for that, I'll introduce as well, is a new postdoc that just started at SERC a couple of weeks ago, Beth Powers, who has a lot of work, a lot of experience working on blacktip shark migrations, some really cool data visualization stuff that she's not sharing today, but hopefully will sometime at a future quarterly meeting. And she came to us from Florida Atlantic University. So I'm excited to welcome her to our lab and to Movement of Life also.
Thanks so much, Matt. So there is a link to that internship in the chat, and then we're trying to get the PDF version of the agenda into the chat, but I'll let you guys know when it's in. And then the last thing is the Wild Lab State of Conservation Tech Survey. If you would like to have your say in sort of defining priorities for conservation tech, this is more broad than animal tracking, but there is a strong animal tracking emphasis. So they're trying to collect feedback from the community about what technological advancements are needed to really move the field of animal tracking forward. So I encourage you guys to fill that out as well. Oh, Talia, you here? Do you want to say anything else?
Hi, yes, thanks, Lacey. I was just going to drop in the link to the latest report too, so people can see kind of what we do with the data. It's an annual survey where we basically trying to understand how people are using technology to advance their conservation work, and also how folks are involved in developing those tools. And yeah, as you said, there's a big presence in the movement and biologging realm, but we're really keen to get more perspectives. So I thought it might be relevant. And yeah, I'll just drop in the link to our latest report, which is a 3-year trends report that shows kind of growing interest in biologging tools and engagement there, in case it's of interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Talia. All right, and then our last bit before we get into our presentations was I invited Catherine Merides to give an update on the downlisting of the scimitar horned oryx, because there's a very interesting tracking component to this project. Catherine's been integrally involved in the restoration of the species, and she's just got some cool behind the scenes information on really what is involved in downlisting a species, what's required to make that happen. So Catherine, are you on? Yeah, you ready to go?
Sure, thanks for the time. Can everybody see some pictures of oryx?
Yes.
Great. So I'll just give a quick rundown. The highlight that Lacey alluded to is that the scimitar horned oryx, as of December 11th, was officially downlisted from extinct in the wild, which had been its threat category since the year 2000. To endangered. So that's a really, really big development for the species, for conservation, for species reintroduction work. And I actually just returned fairly recently from a field mission that is pretty representative of the work that it took by many, many organizations and team members to achieve this downlisting. So I'm just going to shuttle through some images from this work and show a little bit, as Lacey said, behind the scenes of what it takes to get this done. So here in these 3 images, we're working with scimitar horned oryx and a second arid land ungulate species, the addax, that's currently listed as critically endangered. And its sole remaining wild population in Niger is incredibly threatened. So we're also reintroducing this second antelope species into the same protected area in Chad, the reserve Wadi Rimeh, Wadi Ashim, where we're also reintroducing oryx. So you'll see both of these species in these photos. These photos are all taken at our captive source population in Abu Dhabi, managed by the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, who's the primary sponsor and organization on the project. We've selected animals, and then they go through a battery of disease tests. They receive numerous immunizations, and they get veterinary checks, and then we select 25 animals at a time, because that's how many will fit in the cargo plane I'll show you, and we fly them to Chad for acclimation and release. So I'll just kind of skim through some images of veterinarians performing immunizations and taking blood for disease tests, some collar fitting, and you'll see all of the animal handling infrastructure we've got. This is about a 30-person operation to process anywhere between 15 and 30 animals in a morning before it gets too hot in Abu Dhabi to safely handle these animals. And so this is a video of some addax coming down the chute system. You can see all of the pens and the gates and just the really incredible amount of physical infrastructure that it requires to manage these animals in a safe way where animal welfare is prioritized and all the animals are healthy. And this is an example of collared animals being loaded into chutes for transport. So you can see there's like a tunnel of crates, and there's one animal who's been loaded into a crate on the end that's then being raised into the air by a crane truck. That'll go on the back of a flatbed truck and driven to cargo airport, loading onto a cargo airplane. And in mid-flight, they get some food and water inside their crate. So this is in the belly of the cargo plane. These are veterinarians and animal management specialists keeping an eye on everyone, making sure no one's overheating or displaying other concerning symptoms. It is possible to do treatments and interventions on the plane, though thankfully we've never had to do that. This is the cargo plane landing in Abeche, a town in central Chad. That's the closest airport to our release site in the reserve in Chad. This is after about a 8 to 10 hour drive on dirt roads, arriving at the release site and setting up for unloading the animals. And the fencing you see here is our acclimation pen. So here the crates are being unloaded from the truck, and then the animals are finally released into their acclimation pen, which they'll stay for about 1 to 6 months, depending on our transport timeline. These animals will stay until early January and then be released. And then we were also doing some recaptures of more experienced animals to look at behavioral differences between recently released and more experienced animals who have been free roaming in the reserve for multiple years and had multiple offspring. And so this is a sedated animal being released back into the wild with a collar attached. And then I'll just briefly mention that we're now collaborating with African Parks to release addax into a second protected area in Chad, which trial release of 10 animals. We'll see how this goes, but we're really trying to prevent the species from ever reaching extinct in the wild. And then I have some press coverage of the recent downlisting. So this is being covered widely, and we're trying to push public awareness of this really conservation success story for the species. And I have some links that I can include if you're interested in further reading or watching a press conference on this is the general IUCN Red List updates, but they feature the scimitar horned oryx heavily as a conservation success story, which is wonderful. Thanks, Lacey.
Thanks so much, Catherine. It's really exciting. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentations on DynamoVis inspiration for the holidays. And our first speaker, we actually have two speakers today from 422 South. Dave Corfield is the creative director, and Craig Howarth is the technical director. Let's see, Dave, I see you. Is Craig also on?
I'm here, hi.
Okay, yeah. Can you guys, do you have share screen privileges?
Believe so, yes.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
All right, I'll let you take it away.
So greetings from the UK. It's afternoon here, hence all the lights are on. So I thought it'd be worth talking a little bit about who 42 South are, where we started. Traditionally, we're kind of a motion graphics and visual effects company, but we've always been kind of keen on embracing new technologies and utilizing them in our work. And 20 years ago, that's probably what led the BBC to our door to work on a project called Britain from Above, which they wanted to use what was emerging as a normal thing in businesses to track their systems and generate reams of GPS data, whether it be taxis or flights or phone calls, even anything really, that they wanted to kind of use as a way to paint a picture of the UK and a hidden systems that lied within it that nobody knew about. Unfortunately, they didn't know what to do with these reams of spreadsheets, so they came to us to see what we could come up with. And as with most of our projects that we were doing that time, it needed a blend of technical problem solving and creativity to tell that story. So we worked really closely with the BBC and the production company to mold the stories and show what we could reveal with data. Now, at this point, it being 20 years ago, nobody had done anything like this, particularly not on television. There might have been the odd still frame and things like that. But we really, with motion graphics, you need to bring things to life. And what we tend to do with our work is we tend to try and use cinematic techniques that are familiar to audiences that they've seen in movies and other documentaries, as a way to kind of prepare them so that when we're showing them something that's more abstract, particularly like data visualization for the first time that anybody's ever seen it, it might be quite confusing for them. So we're trying to set the scene kind of gently and get them to adopt this new way of looking at things. So we kind of cottoned on the idea of using similar kind of photographic techniques that we've seen in documentaries and wildlife documentaries throughout the years, time lapse and camera movement and long exposures to get this kind of sense of light streaks flowing and moving around the country. And I'll just share the first clip. So this is the first sequence that we did for Britain from Above, which involved London taxis. Just find it. Okay, so it was quite simple in terms of its visualization. We got the movement and we got the pace, and what we slowly kind of realized that actually what data allows you to do is actually reveal the environment that it's in. So if you leave it on, you leave the trace of its movement, you can slowly kind of paint a picture of the roadmap of the UK, in this case, London. So as the day continues, you can see that it slowly builds up what reveals to be the street pattern of London. But that also can tell you sort of other detailed stories. If you dig into it, you can start seeing things like the old joke that taxis don't go south of the river, for example. That might be a curiosity in the UK, but they only want to stay in central London. But also it kind of showed you time of day nuances, where as the traffic started building up, taxis started veering into smaller roads to try and avoid all the gridlock. So it really starts kind of painting a picture and creating a world for a viewer to understand and get information. So Britain from Above was a big success in the UK, got a kind of lot of coverage worldwide as well. And before long, it meant that people started approaching us with other bits of data that they'd been keeping to themselves all these years without knowing what to do with it. And of course, that led to a lot of kind of natural world. People have been tracking birds and sharks and even things like bees. So every kind of bit of data that we got involved a new challenge, because it would become in a different format, or we would have different chunks missing, or it would just be a different animal in a different time zone. So every single one, we kind of had to find a way to find the story within it and then tell that story using the data. Let me just show you some bees. So bees was a curious one, as they managed to attach them to various bees, and we had to find a new way to read that. But we started playing with the world now. We can start playing with it in 3 dimensions. So we want to do kind of like a bee's eye view and be amongst the swarm as they move from hive to hive, and try and really play with the character of the animal to make it unique, but then also do an overview where we can see the patterns that they create in their own environment. So this is where they're moving beehives and showing how the bees can adapt from one location to another and yet find their own way home. So I'd say the challenge of the natural world is the fact that it's inconsistent, is the fact that it does the occasional odd thing. But I think what we found as well with the natural world is that it's better to embrace the curiosities and embrace the unexpected, because it really kind of lets you into the personality of the animals and the story itself. It makes it for a really engaging piece. One of the examples that everybody really enjoyed was a program we did for the Netherlands, where they did a lot of animal tracking, similar to Britain from Above, where they were viewing the world through data and from an aerial point of view. And one of these stories was how sheepdogs would drive lambs through a small town in the Netherlands. Just pull that up. So here we have kind of our sheepdog in orange, and it's his lambs that he's herding through the city. And already you can kind of see with a bit of time manipulation, and you can see the kind of grouping, the way the dog works. And it's all quite fun and enjoyable. And I think the fun bit about this is the fact that when we were analyzing the data, at some point, the dog data just completely disappeared. And nobody could figure out why until we managed to talk to the guy who was recording on the day. And he told us the story of the dog decided to jump in a lake halfway through herding the sheep, and thus killing all the GPS traces. So we embraced that, and we made it part of the story, and we showed how the lambs got home, but then went back to show where the dog was still playing in the lake. So part of it for us is digging into those details and enjoying the anomalies. But yes, as I say, with the natural world, it is a bit of a challenge, and everything's coming in a different form. So as our kind of journey continued, we realized we couldn't keep doing what we were doing with the traditional tools we had. So we had to start developing our own in-house tools. And we came up with something called the GDN. At this point, I'll hand you over to Craig, who can explain a little bit about how we use that.
Hello. My part of the presentation, can you see that screen?
Yes.
Right, okay. My part of the presentation is probably slightly more dry than Dave's. We started off being a television graphics company, trying to use our software that we use to do computer graphics, which it was Maya 3D, which is a general piece of 3D software, and we wrote some scripts to import the data that came into Maya. And going back to Dave's London taxi data, that came into Maya, and it looked like this, and it was fine, you know, but it was slow. You couldn't do anything with it. You couldn't see it in the context of a background easily. And to get something that was usable, we had to render it out. And that's what it looked like rendered out. To try and find the story of the data or work with that data, we would need to go through this process of rendering and playing back and compositing over a background, or we could use something like Google Earth's KML viewer to actually look at the data overlaid over a background, but that was relatively static. But as Dave showed you when we rendered it out, it looked great over a background, and you could see things moving. This proved to be somewhat of an obstacle. It was limiting because Maya really didn't cope with that many objects in it. And we were getting vast amounts of data, big data sets, which we just couldn't deal with. So we had effectively to evolve. We needed to evolve. We needed something that was flexible to process data. We came up with this new tool, the Global Data Navigator, or the GDN as we call it, which is written completely in-house, and it can deal with huge volumes of data. The taxi data, as I said, we had scripts to import it. It came in originally as a spreadsheet from the taxi operating company. But I'm just going to show you a preview of the GDN and how we would work with that data now. So in comes the spreadsheet, and we map the various columns of data into values that we can use within the GDN. And there's some pre-processing going on there to clean the data up as it comes in. But you can see already that we now have the data, it's come in. We can zoom in interactively to the data and have a look at it and play it in real time. Scrub backwards and forth through the data. And you can see that builds a picture of the spider's web building over London. We can add context in terms of time data. So that made a big difference. So this whole idea of being able to work interactively allowed more time for creativity and find different ways of being able to tell the story. The GDN also had the added fact that we built a real globe with a real atmosphere, which was based on real time of day. So whatever the data was, the sun would be in the right position. If it was a sunset, you'd see the sunset. So it provided great context to the data, and you could render it out and composite it, or use it with our 3D system interactively. So as vehicles, as we call it there, vehicle-based data, which is something that moves over time, we needed multiple ways of rendering the data. The vehicles we've already spoken about, any data that moves geographically and is time-based. So although it started off as London taxis, it evolved into aircrafts, as Dave said, bees, wildlife of all different forms. Anything that has a timestamp and moves is a vehicle type within the GDN. Points data, which is good for geographically based statistical data. Arcs, good for the conceptual movement of data between 2 points on the globe. We use this many times going forward. And point cloud data, which was good for different types of programs where we would take in LiDAR scan data and want to visualize that. So looking at point-based data, this is a seismic activity data set across the globe. And you can see that there are various dots which have time-based data, magnitude and depth associated with them year by year. And we're using that to fire off these radiating circles, and the diameter of the circles and the intensity of the circles is mapped to the magnitude of the data itself. And if we look at the point set that came in, here it is as points. We wrote some extra tools within the GDN to be able to map this data, because very often the data comes in and it's not in a form that visualizes easily. You could have sparse points of data. We needed a tool that could allow you to find a way of mapping that data so you could see what was going on. So we have this histogram tool where you can actually stretch the range of distribution of the histogram across the data. And what we've done here is we've mapped that to dot size, so you can see now that you can see really now where the hotspots are. We also can map more channels than just the one channel data. And this, excuse me, shows us mapping the depth data from the seismic activity and mapping that to opacity, which increases the result so that it is even more apparent. This is an example of point cloud data scanned in, and you think, well, okay, that's all very good, but it really is just a 2D facade if you pan around it of the points. But we can use that and we can manipulate that data within GDN, and we can deal literally with tens of millions of points. And lastly, the ARC-based data. This was used, this is actually Facebook migration data of people going on their holidays, going from one point to another. And we wrote this data type that allows you to visualize these kind of like beams that flow from one point to another. And you can map the colors and intensity and the number of particles that flow between them, you know, between those points. And it could be used, for instance, to show conceptually migration from A to B, and you could spread those out and show routes in that way. Lastly, coming back to something which is much more familiar to you, is the GDN rendering out this bird migration sequence, which is showing the birds splitting across the two continents, one going over the Mediterranean, the other one going over the Middle East, migrating and finding their way down eventually to North Africa. That was really a very, very quick overview of the GDN. There's much more in there as a tool, but it's become a very powerful tool for us to be able to use and visualize quite disparate forms of data that comes in. Back to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you. So the GDN gives us a great deal of power, and it means it gives us a great deal of time to iterate. What does iterations give us? Well, iterations give us the ability to really kind of dig into the story and dig into the nuances of everything. And the nuances, in our experience, is the thing that gives things personality, gives it uniqueness, and is actually the thing that really kind of connects with an audience. I think when they're seeing something where they really forget that they're looking at data, and they start seeing the animal and seeing the animal movements and its own personality and the individual personality of that animal, I think you get something more than just a kind of curiosity in people, or it starts becoming something a bit more personal and a bit more kind of emotive. This one here was simply one of those stories where we were following a stork, where he starts his day following a combine harvester and picking up seed from the field. And then we just follow him flying around, tracking with the winds and following kind of wind patterns and climbing, using the eddies so that he can take his journey through his day. And really all people wanted to see here was how beautiful it was, how engaging it was, and the motion and the personality of this individual bird. It wasn't really about behavior as such, except the behavior of this individual. And eventually at the end of the day, he kind of lands on his perch on a telegraph pole by the road. So yeah, even small stories can work with data. I think they don't necessarily always have to be big, large volumes. I think individuals can be as impressive as huge amounts of data. And I think it's just about making that connection and understanding what story you're trying to tell. Yeah, and it means that we can really dig into the lives of characters. And like any kind of great film and great movie, you want to kind of engage with the characters rather than just the scenery. So what do we think is next, and what we're working on next? Well, I think what we're really working on next is trying to start combining all these things together, and really kind of create worlds out of data rather than showing data within a world, if that makes sense. Now, because we've got things like geospatial data, and we have point clouds of vast amounts of terrain, and we also have multiple data systems that we can all run in the same time period or offset time periods. We can see how systems start interacting with each other rather than just showing systems, which is incredibly interesting because it means you can see the knock-on effect between everything. And I'm just going to show a few examples of that we've worked on in the past, if I can actually juggle my windows. Yes, so I think to us it's trying to create new worlds and kind of engage people in those worlds, almost draw people into a new world that they can then get new knowledge from. Because I think the power of data is the fact that you can see things in a different way. You can see through surfaces, you can see things in a time frame that you wouldn't normally be able to. You can see multiple things working at the same time. For example, there was tidal movements with bird movements. You can also change scale as well. You can dive in from Africa following a bird, but then follow it across the Sahara and see it battling storms. Here, I think we've got shipping. You can start combining man-made and natural world. There was shipping and dolphin movements, I think, there. Also, huge scale is obviously still impressive here. We've got wind data. Again, another way of visualizing something we have to creatively come up with a way of showing. This would be telephone exchanges, showing how the country gets lit up from a phone call. These are simply pizza delivery guys covering Manhattan. But then everything, all the way into a globe as well. So it's kind of, we're doing everything, we're doing all things everywhere at the same time. And I think that is what the future is. You just create an entire world out of data and let people live in it and see what they find. And that is everything, I think.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave and Craig. So many really insightful points there. I really like the focus on individual stories, because I think as scientists, we are often really so understandably preoccupied with telling the story of more than one animal, or but I think that can be a really powerful way to connect with an audience too. So thank you for sharing this. I know we have many follow-up questions, but for the interest of time, I'm going to hold questions till the end, and we'll just do probably a group Q&A. And for everyone's awareness, we are obviously fitting a lot in this meeting, and we could have dedicated a whole meeting or more to each of these speakers. So in recognition of that, I have included a little survey form at the end where you can both ask for follow-up details from speakers and provide ideas if there's other speakers, other visualizations, other tools that you think should also be worthy of highlighting in future meetings. So, and Talia speaker has been a close collaborator on this meeting as well with Wild Labs, and we are in discussions about how to sort of take this idea and grow it into a series of meetings. So if you guys are getting frustrated by all the things you want to follow up on from each of these talks, just know we hope to provide more platforms for engagement moving forward. And you can, of course, for now, type questions in the chat that we'll get to at the end, or hold on to them until the end. Okay. Thanks again, Dave and Craig. You guys are doing such amazing work. Okay, our next speaker is Jessica Kendall Barr, who's a Schmidt AI and Science postdoctoral fellow at Scripps Institute for Oceanography at UC San Diego. Jessica, take it away.
Once again. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much, Lacey, for having this event. I think I can definitely speak for maybe many of us in the audience that we've all had these questions of how best to visualize tracking data. And it's really cool to see that there's these sort of all-encompassing platforms like the Global Data Navigator. And I would love to learn more about how scientists can get access to tools like that and how we can sort of create a system where we can use those types of visualization tools for analysis. That's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I'm now working sort of at the interface of Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the Supercomputer Center, where I work with a lot of people who think about visualization and point clouds all day. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the work that I did for my dissertation and how visualizations were really helpful for me to see what a seal does underwater. But first, I wanted to talk about my windy path to visualization and visualization research. So at UC Berkeley, I started to study marine science, and I did a project on sleep in fur seals. I also studied some sleep patterns in humans, and that just made me really interested in these unique patterns that marine mammals have in terms of sleep. Fur seals can sleep with just half their brain like a dolphin when they're in water, and then switch to sleeping with both halves of their brain like a human when they're on land. And then surprisingly, northern elephant seals always sleep like a human, even though they spend about 8 months at sea. So they're always sleeping bilaterally. So I spent the next 5 years of my life trying to ask the question, how do elephant seals sleep at sea? And visualization actually played a big role in finding some of the key patterns there. And now in my postdoc, I'm looking at sleep across different true seal species, brain activity in human freedivers and sea lions, and dive physiology in blue whales and emperor penguins. I just wanted to mention that throughout that whole sort of journey, I also had this parallel journey in learning about the tools that animators use. And I think, I forget if it was Craig, but somebody shared Maya, which is a program that I actually started to use in my undergrad. My brother at the time was really interested in animation, and he became a computer programmer using animation tools to bring in data. So we together wrote probably the same Python script. It's funny how these things get reinvented all over the world, to bring in sort of animal tracking and movement data into Maya. And that's what I used for most of the visualizations in my PhD. All right, so my dissertation combined engineering, data science, visualization, and machine learning to look at how elephant seals sleep at sea. I first wanted to know what tags were out there measuring sleep and if we really had to invent something new. And it turns out that the vast majority of research with marine mammals looking at their sleep was done in a lab environment and with invasive methods. So we really wanted to make a non-invasive method that would work in the wild. And then I designed this surface-mounted sensor that would track animals' sleep patterns when they were out at sea. The hardest part is to make something that's designed for birds flying in the air, actually waterproof and pressure-proof down to about 2,000 meters, which is the deepest dive that we think a northern elephant seal can do. And then to the visualization, I had to analyze hundreds of gigabytes of data, and what I found really helpful was to create animations where I could actually experience my data more vividly. So we can see this seal starting out at the surface, and we're mapping her swimming behavior onto the animation, we're mapping the data collected by the tag onto her swimming behavior. So we can see the animated seal moving at the speed of the data. And then she falls into slow wave sleep with these large slow waves emerging in the lower frequencies of the spectrogram. And then at some point she flips upside down, and that's actually when she is transitioning into another stage of sleep called REM sleep. And at that stage, we think that the animal has lost control of their muscles and is now essentially paralyzed deep below the ocean surface from about 100 meters down to 263 meters, where she finally wakes up and decides to swim back to the surface. So I think the methods that I used here are pretty similar to the previous presentation, with the exception that I'm also inserting the protagonist. I'm connecting you to the experience of this seal, this three-dimensional model of a seal that's animated to the beat of the data. And I think that this was really important to help our paper get out to a really broad audience. This visualization itself was featured by the New York Times and the Atlantic, and this had a bigger impact than I could have ever hoped for. So then we can use these patterns to understand how we could look for sleep in lower resolution data with just time and depth, so animals that we don't have EEG records for. And we can build an algorithm to identify these sleeping dives and add up all the potential naps that an animal could be having for over 8 months at sea. And we found that they only slept about 2 hours a day for up to 295 days at sea, which is really unprecedented across mammals. So as a postdoc, I'm sort of continuing to look at these patterns and also learning about sleep patterns in other endangered animals like Hawaiian monk seals. So through this work, I recognize that we really need new tools for ecologists to look at their data and to collect new data. So I'm building new biosensors for some projects with whales and human freedivers and California sea lions to measure EEG underwater. And then I'm also interested in these sort of visual analysis workflows, which use tools similar to the GDN to look at your data and generate new insights quickly and effectively. Ultimately, those visual analysis platforms, I think, can be really effective to get our message out there about conserving the ocean and ocean ecosystems. So I know that we're a little bit short on time, so maybe I'll just stop there and I'll show just a couple of other projects in each of these areas. So these are some examples of visualizations with single animals. So where you're actually listening to the heartbeat of a blue whale, you're waiting 20 seconds between each beat, and it really helps you understand the magnitude of the sort of physiological adaptations that these animals have developed. This one on the bottom is a three-dimensional visualization of a bubble net that a humpback whale is using to feed. So it helps us also communicate our hypotheses and simulate sort of what we think is going on behind the scenes. These are some examples of cooperative behavior, so multiple whales coming together to feed and how they might be collaborating. We can also show the impacts of disturbance. So we can show a normal dive and a disturbed dive and really illustrate the difference between the two. And then I'm also really heavily involved in research that communicates the flood protection benefits of coral reef ecosystems. So we've built a web browser that maybe I'll just put that in the chat. Oh, yeah. So on my website, and so this is the browser. Oh, sorry, I sent that to Lacey. I'll send it to everyone. And then my website has a bunch of these as well, and some of the ones with sleeping seals. And I also have a course that is freely available to anyone online. It's designed as a 5-week course, but it's pretty beefy, so it might take you a while to get through all the videos, but that's sort of the idea, is that if you want to learn a little bit about digital illustration, you could pick up that module, outlining a study organism for a talk, or you might want to learn how to get animation data into an animation software like Autodesk Maya. And then as I pick up new skills in different programs, like right now I'm trying to learn Unreal Engine, I may add more modules to this sort of live course so that we can all learn new things. So yeah, lots of different projects. I just wanted to mention briefly that right now I'm working on creating this sort of interface for analyzing data that is inherently geospatial and also physiological. So I'm incorporating 3JS and Unreal to make some sort of interface like this. And I just want to have an open call to anybody who wants to collaborate with me from this meeting. I'm around and thinking about these questions, and I would love to work together. I think I had one more. Yes, this one here. Here is an animation that I made recently. I'm just going to stop sharing and I'll put these in the chat. This animation shows some of the temperature changes that are happening in our ocean right now, and that was actually shared at COP, the UN Climate Change Conference. So I will share that video in the chat. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions later on.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I've just been super impressed by everything you are pulling off as kind of a one-woman band. It's great. You're really pushing the field forward. And yeah, if anyone has ideas for collaboration, I will be sure to put Jessica's contact information and all these links in to an agenda that we'll share around after the meeting, along with the recording. So thanks, Jessica. Okay, next up we have Melanie Smith, who's the Director of Digital Science and Data Products for Audubon. And she's going to talk about the Bird Migration Explorer, which has been making quite a splash in movement circles around the world. So excited to hear more about the story behind this amazing work.
Hi, everybody. Are you seeing the full screen view?
Yes.
Okay, great. So good morning from Anchorage, Alaska. I see that we're spanning a good part of the globe here. Glad to be here. So I work for Audubon and I led the project to build the Bird Migration Explorer. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. And I'm going to tell you, first of all, tell you what the product does, and then I'll tell you a bit about how we built it and how we use it. So it's available online at birdmigrationexplorer.org, or that's in English, and there's a full Spanish version at exploraves.org. This is a digital product that we launched in September of 2022. And we built it to serve two primary audiences. The first one being birders and bird curious people, and the second one being conservationists and advocates. This is the homepage, and you'll see these three main pathways through the tool here in orange. So you can also explore the map itself of 10,000 individually tracked birds. And so with these three pathways, you can look up a bird species to see its full annual cycle migration. You can look up a location to see how it's connected through birds to other parts of the hemisphere, or you can look up a conservation challenge to understand where and when birds are facing these potential threats. So beginning with the species migration maps, these show us the places birds use across the full annual cycle to improve our understanding and therefore our conservation outcomes. And these maps give us a hemispheric perspective on migration, while also allowing us to zoom in and learn more about migration patterns in our local area. So here we've taken tracking data, processed, animated it, created layers at multiple spatial scales, and then built it all into this seamless front end. Location connections maps, that's the second major pathway. These show us how birds connect people and places, and that local action has a hemispheric impact. So this is a map for Estes Park, Colorado, and it's showing me the places that tagged birds from Estes Park have been re-encountered across the hemisphere. I can explore those connections to find out what species it was that flew between those two places, and learn about conservation sites that my birds use when they go to other places. And the third major pathway is conservation challenges. This is a species conservation challenge map, and this helps researchers and advocates understand conservation and policy needs at state, national, and international levels. So these maps combine weekly bird distribution data from eBird with the footprint of conservation challenges. And by overlaying those, we're able to see where, when, and how extensively birds are exposed to human activities and environmental changes throughout the year. So this example is showing us long-billed curlew exposure to anthropogenic groundwater depletion in the springtime. And yeah, next slide. Okay, so this project partnership was what made this happen. It really was an extraordinary partnership among science, conservation, and technology organizations. And that included more than 280 scientists and institutions that contributed data. Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center was a founding partner right from the start of Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative. We have a number of leading conservation organizations represented here, as well as a number of technology organizations. So, for example, MoveBank is where the tracking data are stored and made available to us. Esri is the technology that is behind all of the mapping. And we contracted with Launch, Proto Studios, and Blue Raster to engineer the product. A lot of partnership. I really can't underscore that enough. And where that particularly comes through is in the data. There wasn't one place we could go to and just get a whole bunch of data to start this project. Getting the data together was a really big part of the project. And of course, the tracking data is stored on MoveBank. So that did, that was huge for us to have it all in one place. But it took individual data sharing agreements to get access to each individual data set. And ultimately, we collected about 10,000 bird tracks for 187 species from about 400 different studies. Another major data type are connections. Here, we're taking all the tracking data and we're adding in banding data, data from the Modus Wildlife Network, and data from genetic studies. And these are giving us a point A to point B connection, creating about 5.1 million place-to-place connections. We also needed to understand species sensitivity to threats so that we could link up those conservation challenge hemispheric footprint layers with the species distribution and abundance layers. And so we built this species threat matrix with 15,000 records documenting those sensitivities. So this is just a slice of the data in the Bird Migration Explorer, just a few pieces of it that I thought I would raise up and mention here. There's certainly a lot more of it going on behind the scenes. And with that, I'll say a bit about how we built this tool. So this is the technology stack that we're working with. And I'll take you through this few steps at a time. So starting with the data processing, we were working with a lot of data. So wherever possible, we automated data processing using scripts in Python and R. We are storing data and processing data. The processing, storage, and power comes from Amazon Web Services. And then there's also a role for Arc Pro in here. And those are all working together to allow us to clean the data, to standardize it, and then to summarize it. So all that raw data in all of its various forms coming together and being streamlined and cleaned and ready for the next step. At this point, we passed the data to Blue Raster, and they took on yet another processing step where they would transform it into the exact format that the front end needed. And then they would publish that on ArcGIS Online. So ultimately, this resulted in thousands of data services being published on ArcGIS Online. and the visualization step. So, you know, I'm talking about this like it's a linear process, and it isn't at all a linear process. It's really kind of a circular process of iterating. This took either, you know, kind of took 2 years or 4 years, depending on how you look at it. So from the day we started the Migratory Bird Initiative, launching it from the very beginning, was 4 years later that we launched the Bird Migration Explorer. And from day one, we were starting to prototype maps and visualizations. It was from the time we hired Launch and Blue Raster to actually build the product online. That was a 2-year timeline. So, you know, we had to return to these parts over and over until we got it right. The front end was designed in Figma, and then it was engineered using React, GraphQL, and the ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript. So frequently we would design something in ArcPro, and then we would work with Blue Raster to convert that into JavaScript code, and that gave us a lot of ability to do the type of customization you're seeing here. And one of the challenges of visualizing these data is finding the right balance between clarity for the target audience. We didn't want to make it more complicated than it needed to be. There's already a lot going on here. But also we need to stick to the, you know, close to the accuracy of the underlying data. And also these maps needed to be interactive and zoomable, and that accuracy needed to hold across spatial scales. So we, you know, one of the cartographic issues we dealt with was the variation in precision between different data sets. If you use a GPS to map the location of a bird, you could get that location down to someone's backyard. But if you use a light level geolocator, you might just know that that bird was somewhere in Florida. And we needed to be responsible with that difference and make sure that our users could understand that and that it was represented well, and that we weren't over-representing how much we actually know about where these birds go. So I will end with just leaving you with a few thoughts on using data visualization to be effective in conservation. We've applied the Explorer in different ways for outreach, education, research, conservation, and advocacy. This helps us clearly communicate and understand ways which birds connect us across the hemisphere, and provides a foundation for understanding and motivating around hemispheric conservation challenges. Hemispheric visualization creates really powerful messages. And like for me, when I see this map on the right of the footprint of light pollution across the Americas, it really drives home how extensive the human influence is on the earth, and how there aren't that many places left where that influence isn't present. And when you're a bird, this is one type of threat that you might be sensitive to and encounter along your migratory journey. And it's one of many. So it's just really a gauntlet of things that they're interacting with and that could impact them. And I feel like these broad perspectives really help us see and bring that to life. At the same time, the data are all localizable, and you can zoom in on this map, and that's what this image on the left is showing. You can zoom all the way into your local area. You can see what that pattern looks like where you live, and you can get information on species that are sensitive to light pollution and are exposed to it in your local area. So hemispheric data synthesis is revealing new insights about our world and the world of migratory birds. And so in this example, we're seeing one species exposure to disorienting nighttime lights during spring migration. And when we combine bird distribution with the footprint of human activity, we're gaining a lot of valuable information to evaluate impacts of these activities. So, you know, then we can start stacking up. So you can see how that exposure level changes over the year and geographically where it's happening. And we can start stacking this up across a whole suite of threats to a species to start to understand the multiple interactions. And then we can even start expanding that across species. So one of the things we're working on right now is a hemispheric assessment of threats to warblers using these data. And then this is my last slide, just to tell you about a success story where we've used maps to influence policy. We took this map, our policy staff took this map to Mary Peltola. She's in the House of Representatives on behalf of Alaska, which just so happens to be my representative. And we asked her to co-sponsor the Migratory Birds of the Americas Conservation Enhancement Act in recognition of how important Alaska is for migratory birds, and using this map to help her understand those connections. And she did end up becoming a co-sponsor of the bill. So I'd really like to think that Audubon had an influence in her deciding to do that. So that's it for me. And yeah, thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you, Melanie. There's so much I want to dive into about how you guys really balanced both the error that you're talking about and the different scales of data. Like I think that's what excites me about the Bird Migration Explorer, is just how really user-friendly it is for someone who's never dealt with data before to do a lot of pretty advanced exploratory visualizations. So I appreciate you sharing this with us, and we'll do more Q&A at the end of the. Are you able to stay for that?
Yes, I can stay.
Okay, great. Great. Okay, and then we're going to get into the second part of our meeting, which is focused more on tools and platforms for visualizing movement data. So after getting inspired by these really striking examples of full-blown projects, this might, I hope, will be a way for you to think about how you might actually take some of those lessons and apply them using some of these new tools. So our first speaker is Dr. Benjamin Letcher at the US Geological Survey. He's going to talk to us about the Tagged Animal Movement Explorer, or TAME. And we can see your screen, Ben.
Awesome. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lacey. This is an incredible opportunity, and I'm really appreciative to be a part of this and to hear about these amazing projects. So I'm going to talk about our project, which is called TAME, Tagged Animal Movement Explorer, and you can see the link there. And I'll do a demo, a very short demo near the end, and you could follow along on that link if you want. And thinking about some of the projects that were just talked about, I think our audience here is less general public, but more the individual researcher who has some pretty complicated data that they want to be able to explore and dig into. So that's what this is about. And Jeff Walker is co-author on this. He's a developer extraordinaire who basically takes our crazy ideas and turns them into interesting apps. So just a little bit of background, I'm a fish population ecologist, and I study small fish and small streams, and we know that local habitat matters, and how they move, how the fish move around from place to place really matters, especially when we're thinking about climate refugia. So to understand population dynamics over the years, we've tagged tens of thousands of fish, but I had done some movement models and they weren't very satisfying. I couldn't really understand the movement patterns very well. So about maybe 8 years ago, I developed this initial interactive visualization that you can see a picture of here. That was pretty good, and it taught me a ton about our specific location, and I wanted to do more, so we decided, we got a little bit of funding to basically adapt this into a more flexible version, and that's what became TAME. And throughout all the visualizations that we develop, we really like to focus on Schneiderman's visualization mantra, which is overview first, zoom and filter, then details on demand. In fact, Schneiderman liked it so much, he repeated it 10 times in his paper. And with TAME in particular, what we're thinking about is flexibility and exploration. So we want a tool that's super flexible. Anybody can use it. You can upload your data and really quickly get going, digging into the data and learn about it by exploration, sort of successive learning and self-learning. So a few characteristics about it: it's web-based, it's free, it's open source. We tried to make it as easy as possible, and it's very interactive. If you are worried about logins and you don't want to store your data somewhere else, The data are all, you can do it where the data are local only. It's just on your browser. It's not stored until it's shared. And if you do want to share it, you can create an account and you can make your project public or private. And we have a flexible file format that uses a column mapping to take your variables and turn them into our variables. And by default, we use MoveBank format. So there's a few key capabilities of this tool that include mapping. So we map variables to color, size, or outline of dots of locations of individuals, and selection, and then cross filters. The real workhorse of this is these cross filters, and we've used these in a number of visualizations, and they're extremely powerful, especially for large data sets where you have lots of variables and you want to understand the relationships between the variables. And you can link those to maps as well, and that's what we've done with TAME. So it's a powerful way to filter and explore your data, and you can do that with any variable in the data set. And we also have a number of derived variables that get calculated automatically. So if all goes well, I'm going to do a very quick demo of two of our favorite data sets, one from Antarctic petrels, and then waterfowl in Alaska from the USGS Alaska Science Center. So this is what TAME looks like. If you want to dig deeper into this very short demo here, there's a user guide with a bunch of videos that Jeff made that introduce all the parts of it. I'm gonna go over it quickly now. When you upload a data set, you can create a new project, or if you want to explore a data set, you can load a project. And once you do that, you can see something in the legend that tells you about the number of tags and the number of observations. So in this case, there's 75 tags and about 4,800 observations. And over here is the part with those three characteristics where you can map the individual variables to the color, the size, or the outline of each of these points, and then the selection and the cross filters as well. So each point is an observation from the data set. And if you mouse over it, it'll highlight some information about that tag ID and the movements and the total movements of the individual. And then you can select one or more of these to highlight them. So that's, at this point, it's kind of a static visualizations, but you can get kind of a feel for the data, especially if you change the color variable or other things, other characteristics of the points. So the individual, I'll just go through some of these variables quickly. Here's the individual ID. Then from that, we get the total number of observations, or total distance, or total time, then some movement metrics, including day of the year, which can be really valuable, as you'll see in the next one, for looking at migration patterns, distance, time, velocity, heading, and then some additional variables. And these are user supplied variables. And in this case, the height above mean sea level is an interesting one. So you can really quickly learn that these birds are really high up here. They're at 3,000 meters, then they go down to sea level to feed. And this project was about feeding on krill in the ocean. So I'm going to put this back to individual ID and then look in a little more detail at that mean sea level. I'm not going to spend too much time on selection, but you can draw areas and bounding boxes and see which birds were either in both or either or all of the bounding boxes. So here's the important part, the cross filters. And what you do is I've pre-selected a bunch of variables, including date, behavior classification, and some other things. And you get a histogram for each of these automatically. But the important thing is that these histograms are all linked. So when you filter on one variable, it updates all the other variables based on that filtering. So if we select for 2012, these are the data from 2012. Here's the data for 2013. Here it is for 2014. So you can learn really quickly something about the data. You can have, so these are continuous when there's like a histogram, a horizontal one. They're categorical variables, so you can see where do the fish. I have to avoid saying fish. I work on fish all the time. These birds come back where they return from the ocean and versus where they depart. And you can see they all depart from one location. And that was the tagging location. You can also, these update really quickly and interact with the map. So say you want to make kind of a funny little animation of the heading. So this is the heading of all the birds. So these are the ones going north. This is when they're going east. This is when they're going south, west, and north again. So you can see them kind of spinning around. What if you wanted to find the birds that move the farthest? So now we're selecting on the long distance movers. And so these are the points for those long distances, and you can find the whole track for any one of the birds by mousing over that point. And then finally, here's height above sea level, which we looked at in the static view before, but now we can look at it in a dynamic way. So here's low sea level values, higher, they're getting higher and higher, and you can see the high elevation values are up in these roosting areas. But there's some interesting observations like here, where the bird's very high, but it's actually close to the ocean. So that teaches you something pretty quick about the data. Okay, so this is one data set. Another data set I want to look at is this much larger one. So this is waterfowl from the USGS data set. And you can see there's 845 observations and about 845 tags and about 90,000 observations. So this is a pretty big data set. It looks kind of like a mess when you first look at it. But what if we did some filtering so we can try to understand what's happening here? So I've preloaded in the cross filter the animal common, which is the common animal name, and then day of year, so we can look at migration patterns. So let's look just at the tundra swan. And it takes a moment to filter because there's a lot. So these are all the observations for the tundra swan now grouped by individual. Let's look at their migration patterns starting in January. So this is the wintering time, and as you might imagine, they're down in the south. And now we're going to dynamically show how they go north as towards the summer. Now we're in June, July, August, October, and now they're heading back down to their wintering grounds. So this makes it dynamic and easy to play with. You can pick any variable in your data set, look at how they interact. You can filter on multiple variables. Let's say we want to kind of go crazy and see if we can look at the migration pattern at one time for all these birds at once. It's a little much having this as individual. Let's color by the animal name, and then we'll go back to the cross filter where we have all the species chosen, and we'll look at the migration patterns. So just as before with day of year, we'll start here. And now these are all colored by species, and we'll start in January 1. And because there's more data, it takes a little while. But now this is the winter grounds. Now you can see them. You can essentially make yourself a movie as they go through the summer to their summer grounds, summer. Now we're in the fall, October, and now down to December. So I hope this really quick overview gives you an idea of how this might be useful, especially at a first look at data, as a way to slice and dice the data and really understand patterns. And I'd be really happy if it's really fun for us to look at these data sets. So I'd love to see some other data in this platform. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. And just to confirm, is it open to anyone to upload? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And you said MoveBank. It takes MoveBank data.
Yeah, as default, but you can use essentially any format.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We're going to keep moving in the interest of time, but we still have some time for questions at the end. So next up we have, move spotlight. We have Somayeh Dodge from UC Santa Barbara. Somayeh, what's your lab called? The Movement Research Lab?
Move Lab.
Yes. She's going to talk about DynamoVis.
Yes. Hi. Well, thanks for having me. Should I start sharing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for this opportunity. It's been amazing to see all these fantastic tools and visualizations, and I just want to continue with the same theme, introducing DynamoVis as an exploratory data visualization software for mapping movement in relationship to environmental factors. As Lacey mentioned, I'm Somayeh, Associate Professor at the UC Santa Barbara. My background is GIS, and I work on movement modeling, analysis, and visualization, and in general, both in human domain and animal movement. So the background for this tool is basically, I started working with ecologists and I was fascinated by movement of animals and developing tools to analyze them. But we realized that we need some tool to communicate between geographers and ecologists. So I was thinking about ways to map movement data to be able to understand and look at patterns. So we wanted to develop a tool that is easy to use, but also brings together all different aspects of movement in terms of location of individuals, time of movement, and more importantly, attributes in terms of environmental context or other behavioral attributes that we might have in the data set. So for mapping location and attributes, as other visualizations showed this morning, we also took advantage of Bertin's visual variables, such as points, lines, color, the width of lines, or the size of points, or direction of vectors to show different attributes or different variables. So as you can see here, for example, this is one track of albatross trajectories going from Galapagos to Peru, and the visualization uses lines or vectors to show the direction of wind, and the color shows wind speed. And here we are using color and the width of line to show how the bird is challenged by wind, shown with red, and or the bird using wind and flying faster, shown in blue. So the size of the line or the width of the line represent how fast the bird moves. Or using color again and the size of the points, here we show how the albatross moves towards Peru, and the greenness represent the food availability in the ocean, represented by ocean net primary production. And as you can see here, the greenness is higher around the coast of Peru, and on the way back, the bird flies faster, as shown with the size of the dots. In order to represent time of movement, we are taking advantage of animation to show the progression of movement and a space-time cube. Basically, a space-time cube is a 3D visualization that times moves upward. So the third axis is the temporal dimension, and the geographic map is underneath. So the 2D, the two-dimensional axis are geographic locations, and then the time moves forward. So we are incorporating all of these using Java and processing in DynamoVis. DynamoVis can be downloaded via our GitHub. We also published a paper on it that in movement ecology that talks about the software and different aspects of it. And as you can see here, we want it to be a very flexible tool that the user can load their own data set in MoveBank format or any CSV file that you have that includes location and other attributes. So then you can visualize your data set using different color ramp with different variables that you can select here. We also have a timeline for selection of the birds that you are looking at or any other animals. So I just go through different demos of these and to show you different aspects of the tool. And as I said, the tool is Java based, and you can just download it and click on the jar file and open it. Hopefully in Mac it's a little tricky, but you can open it with the one executive file. So we have, again, the interface that allows you to change the underlying map and both look at your data both in 2D geographic map and 3D space-time cube representation. You have the flexibility to rotate and work with the 3D space-time cube at different angle to see how the interaction between the animals and their movement at different location. You can also zoom in and out in the geographic map and also change the background map. You can use the seek toolbar to go back and forth in your animation. And also you have the flexibility to change the representation of the visualization. We also incorporated a time filter. So for each timeline that you have, you can select a specified window by moving the bars and just filter the data based on time and scroll through your dataset timeline. So basically limiting the data to a specific timeline that you might be interested to look at. And then you have the options to choose different variables, as I said, and change the representation of your visualization. For example, here we are looking at the relationship between wind and movement speed, and we are trying to visualize it using colors for wind and the size of the line for movement speed to create that visualization of albatrosses that shows how the wind is helping bird and or challenging bird at different timelines. So here is the product. As a result, you can generate a video for your presentations or outreach, and also you have an option that you can set to show the history of the track. As you can see here with the very thin lines, you see the history of the track, and the visualized like the last few weeks or the last few hours of the data are brighter. And as you can see here, the visualization clearly shows how the birds are using wind to fly back to Galapagos, and sometimes they are challenged by wind when they fly to Peru for foraging. So with this visualization, you can explore the relationship between different movement and context and environmental variables and explore the correlation between them or how they interact with each other. And I should also mention that the data, the visualization uses MoveBank format, but also if you don't have MoveBank format, we can convert that. Here is a visualization of one female tiger that we are visualizing using DynamoVis. As you can see here, you can see the topographic map underneath and also the history of the track underneath. And here we are highlighting the heads for patrolling behavior, and the size of the lines represent the speed of the tiger. Here, although the tiger trajectories are every 1 hour, usually, so it's a little coarser data that we are looking at, but you can start to see the patterns where the hunts happens and where the tiger spends most of her time around this flatter landscape and versus the area that is hilly and more challenging to move around. However, as you can see, she patrols the entire boundary quite a bit and in regular frequencies. And also we can visualize more tracking data to understand the interaction. Here you are looking at one female tiger with two cubs, and visualize in red and green and blue is the other cub. As you can see here, they are walking together. They are together all the time. But as time goes, the cubs start to separate from their mother and disperse and start their establishing their own territory. So I just as here the dots represent whether it's a day movement or night movement, and the blue and the greens are the cubs, and then the red is the mother. And if you wait a little bit, the cubs start to disperse. and move away from mom while interacting, sometimes with their mom or with each other. So maybe I move the animation a little bit. So here the cubs starts to disperse and go their own ways. And finally, we are extending DynamoVis to a web-based platform so that it's easier for others to use. As you know, with problem with Java, it keeps updating, and you need to update your Java for using DynamoVis software. So we thought to use a web-based platform to implement some of the functionalities of DynamoVis and make it more accessible for others to use, although this is not yet ready for release, but we are working on it. And with that, I want to thank you and wish you happy holiday. And I wanted to thank all the students who contributed to this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Somayeh. It's such a cool tool, and yeah, really looking forward to the web-based version soon.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Dr. Tobias Petri from
Hi.
Firetail. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, okay, I'll just share the screen. Hopefully, screen number 2 I want to share. Can you all see some colorful picture?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I'll just swap this for my slides for a second. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I added some stars because of the theming, yeah. So thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. Thanks, Lacey, and thanks to the Smithsonian Movement of Life initiative. So today I want to talk about a few visualization challenges that we faced recently, and want to give you an insight on, in particular, Firetail, with a focus on large scale and on acceleration data in particular. So animal tag data. So I'm trying to get to the next slide. Yeah, okay. So a word about our company, Berger, or SBG for short. We're doing software engineering, and we're one of the key products that we develop or have developed for quite some time is MoveBank in association with the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior. And we're also involved in the Icarus global monitoring of animals, or global monitoring with animals in particular, a project. And one spin-off that we had from there was Firetail, to just also have a possibility to visualize the data, where we are in close cooperation with EOPS that are located near us. And yeah, so I will just dive right in. So when we see data, we start usually at a very low level on the data layer, and so where we just received the raw data, and the first thing, and we saw a lot of examples today, is that we are visualizing these data. But for a complete understanding, and this is the core reason that we have developed Firetail, it's also that we require some kind of like pattern detection to actually visualize the meaning of the data, and to first detect the patterns and ultimately arrive at some understanding of behavior on the high level of the data that we receive. So we really get a description of the data layer now. So with so let's start with the tags that we usually get from the scientists. So the tag data, which is usually like deployed or collected in the field. And nowadays, these tags produce multiple streams of data. They produce like GPS data, they produce auxiliary sensor data, and for Firetail in particular, they produce triaxial accelerometer data, which is a movement proxy, or like can give us a behavioral proxy for the data. And the later or modern tags also include like orientation data and lots more. So all of this together is usually also collected for like multiple individuals, obviously, and often hundreds of individuals. So we're dealing with really large scale spatial temporal data in this regard. And yeah, to grasp these levels we are dealing with, let's start with the visualization level of like bird's view of baboon data, which was published like 8 years ago. It's a pretty well-known data set. You may have seen it before. And back then, it was really pushing the boundaries with 26 animals that were observed with approximately 10 millions of fixes back then. So it was pretty challenge for us also to get this like on the level of interactivity. This was published in the Crowfoot Lab. But when we compare this to data that we have nowadays, so this is a study on guinea fowl data that started in 2016. I got the permission of Damien Farine to show you this today. They started with the data collection in 2016. They had like 408 deployments, and the data collection is ongoing. And this is 1 Hertz data from EOPS tags, so very detailed data set. And for this, to actually make this interactively replayable and to show heat maps, we really need some good indexing and caching strategies to actually come there. And when we zoom into this data set and to see really how magnificent this data set really is, we can zoom in a bit more, and there's actually no further map data available on this level. So, and to give you an idea, this is about this is over 1 billion of data points that we are browsing interactively here. So even the map stopped at this point, but we are still seeing more details into the data. And but let's just step back a bit and have a look at another data set from Cheng et al. In 2019, where we see like the typical visuals that we usually see. So we see one individual at a time, we see multiple individuals that fade over time and that we can see over a specific time stretch. So this is the very typical way to interactively view the data. And with Firetail, we also have the opportunity to go to the point cloud view to really do a kernel density estimate and do the kernel density estimate interactively over time and really explore the density regions over time, weekly, monthly, or really interactively for custom intervals. And by this, for example, study the presence and absence in certain regions. But what we then saw, what we saw for now is GPS data, but we can also like synchronize a lot of other resources as well, like, for example, the height, speed, and auxiliary data, or what's the deal here is like the acceleration data in the burst view. So this is typically like 20 Hertz data. So and this can easily grow into the gigabytes of data for one individual over the course of several weeks, and really adds to the amount of data that we can observe. But in Firetail, we have the possibility to really watch this in a synchronized manner. So, but what we can also do is, and this is part of the visualization and our understanding of data, is that we can now segment the data and create an AI-guided segmentation of the data to detect acceleration patterns in the data or activity patterns. And we can now interactively inspect the context and overlay known behavior and observations. For example, we can also add video annotation data. And finally, we will come up with a structured assignment of behavior from acceleration, which is in perfect sync with the GPS data. And this is, for us, is an example of how visualization is aiding this process of knowledge discovery and in the long run, also the creation of gold standards for data sets. So finally, I wish to add one more layer to my initial layering, so which is like the meta behavior, because by now I talked about behavior as is, but obviously we want to investigate into long stretches of time and long behavioral adaptations, for example, also in terms of climate change or like really the long-term observations. So, but what is needed for this is really initiative for standardized annotation of behavior, which makes sense and brings this visualization on the behavioral level to a level where we can really analyze the data. So if you're interested in this, reach out. We are happy to share our expertise, and yeah, that's my static part of the talk. Thank you. And let me switch to, can you still see my screen?
We see the multicolored screen.
Yeah, that's good, because this is the data set from Damien Farine, the Guinea fowl data set, where we have all the individuals on the one hand. You can also select several of these and then just zoom into the data. And obviously we can also browse the complete data set. And let's hide the complete data set. And now we can basically move through the complete data set interactively and browse it and see where the individuals are interacting, and also choose some time frames that are we can just look at 6-hour frames or time windows, and also see heat maps for this. So in this regard, we can really manage the complete data set and go on the level of on the individual level and see the behavior of these animals. And another thing I wanted to show is where we have this, where I can better show this individual behavior level, is for example here in the live track stored by the MPI data, where an individual is tracked over time, and we can follow this individual, and at the same time we see the acceleration data. But we also see, and we can get into the behavioral annotation that we assigned, and we also see, on the right side, we can see the sensor data that is also recorded by these modern tags. And our newer versions will also be capable to do this for multiple tags at once. So you have the behavior for multiple animals, and can join these views and understand the joint behavior of, for example, in groups or in the interaction of several animals. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to show today. There's lots more I could show, but I think we want to go to the questioning part. Yeah. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak here. It was very interesting to see all the other talks. It was really amazing. Thank you.
Toby, thank you so much. It's really great to see, someone pushing on the accelerometer visualization space. It's a really difficult challenge. So it's really great to see this, and also really interested in the behavioral tagging project you're talking about. So we should talk more about opportunities for collaboration there.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Before, really quickly, we have about 10 minutes left before we get to Q&A. I just wanted to reiterate this opportunity to provide additional ideas for future meetings, and also feedback on components of this meeting that you would like to do a deeper dive on. So I'm going to put a link here in the chat for everyone to fill out a form whenever you have a minute. It won't take long. And then just a quick plug for our next quarterly meeting, which will be, it hasn't been set yet, but February or March sometime next year. So lots of people brought up Move Apps as a platform that should probably have been in this meeting, but it was such a big topic that we decided to dedicate a meeting to it entirely. And so that's our plan. Next February, March, we'll be focusing on Move Apps and eco data. And if you don't know Move Apps, I'll also put a link in the chat. It's a it's a tool that's really trying to make animal movement analysis accessible to people who may not have strong coding skills. So lots to talk about there. Okay, let's get into questions. I saw someone with a hand just a second ago. Jared, do you have anybody lined up or?
I don't.
Okay, if you want to raise your hand again, if you still have a question, raise it. If not, we'll open it up. Let me take Toby off spotlight. Okay. And these can be questions for any of our speakers.
I guess I have a question open to all, and that's simply, I think one of the commonalities of movement data are errors in the location of positions. And I'm wondering if you all recommend that error filtering happens beforehand, or obviously when you're looking at some of these movements, you see some errors as you're doing the animation. And so I'm also wondering if there's ways in the program that you actually can remove those as you're moving through an animation.
Sorry. So I think with 3D data, you get this to a large extent. You get lots of weird artifacts when you try to geo-reference your 3D track or pin it in space and time. So some of the times that we were expecting to see a really beautiful spiral for a humpback whale creating a bubble net, we instead saw sort of a flattened oval that was very disappointing. And sometimes, you know, you get that stretching effect. So there are ways of sort of fixing these in these 3D softwares using sort of bespoke manual methods, but I think that we really do need better tools for like georeferencing 3D tracks and fixing at that high resolution. I also have issues with when I put in bathymetry with my seals going under the ground because their locations are a little bit approximative. And I think everybody just solves this usually by raising the track 10 meters. So I don't know that there's perfect ways, but I like the idea of having sort of a Gaussian track where you sort of visualize this uncertainty over time. Anyone else want to answer?
Yeah, we thought about this a lot because we use DynamoVis with different movement data, and oftentimes the data comes from other researchers who collect their own data. And the problem with error is so specific to the data that you're working with. So you can prescribe an approach to deal with error for all data sets using these tools. So my recommendation would be to remove the errors and outliers before loading the data, clean up the data before loading the data to the tools, that you get better visualization, because the tool is not capable of identifying errors, not at this version that we developed. But also it's highly dependent on the type of data that you are working with, especially different time resolution that you have. So for example, if you incorporate a filter based on spatial and temporal buffers, then it might not be universal for all data sets.
I do think, I mean, there are certain things you can do automatically to remove some gross errors in data, and certainly the data in your community does tend to have an inherent noise to it. But often you get oddities with GPS locations which move vast distances which are above the capability of the species to move within a time sample. So you can, you know, do some crude filtering just to move those erroneous points out. But in terms of, you know, looking at individual case-by-case analysis, everything has a different personality. And sometimes I think the only way is to look at it and have a dialogue, because you might be removing something which is not noise. You might actually be removing something which is interesting in this data. So this gross sort of filtering idea of just trying to filter stuff is is dangerous, and it does become time consuming. But I think sometimes you only really can understand what to remove until you've seen it warts and all, that is a necessary part of the process, I guess.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
I want to call attention to one thing in the chat Talia just wrote, asking if there's a need for more dedicated spaces and opportunities to exchange ideas and coordinate on movement visualization work. That's something Wild Labs really specializes in. And so maybe give it a thumbs up or comment here, or add it in. You can add it as a comment in the survey as well. So we're just trying to get an idea of what the need is out there. Yeah. All right, we have 2 minutes. Meredith, you got it.
First, I want to thank all the presenters and the organizers. This has been so incredible and really has served to provide really good inspiration for the break. This is a question for Melanie Smith. I was, I guess, quite struck by how the connection aspect of the migratory maps might provide opportunities to connect policymakers or conservationists in different locations because of the nature of the birds connecting these spaces. So I was curious if Audubon has been involved in mitigating any sort of, habitat alteration projects or anything like that because of the connections that the bird movements have brought awareness to. If I need to clarify, please let me know. But basically, in some of these spaces where birds are migrating to, has it actually inspired more connections between, say, North America and Central and South America?
Yeah, so right, with those data, we really are hoping that will help people understand that they are connected through birds to all of these other places. And I have 2 examples. One is thinking about a certain bald eagle preserve in Alaska, where we want to engage people in a threat to that area. We can map out all of the places that are connected to that place, and we can tell people your birds, not just birds that you care about or a species you like, but literally your birds are using this place. So that's one way that we can use those data and plan to start doing more of. And then another answer that's closer to the question you're asking is, we have a project now that's funded through the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. They have a program called Southern Wings, and it is there to connect U.S. state wildlife agencies with information of what's going on when their birds leave their state, and help them get information on the full annual cycle of their birds. And so this is Audubon, Georgetown, American Bird Conservancy, and Cornell Lab of Ornithology. We are bringing the best of what we have and repackaging it state by state so that they have these packets of data, and the connections data set is what we're using for that, so that they'll see all the connections from their state. So they'll have their bird shed mapped out, and then we have information on conservation work that's happening in those places, so that they can identify partners they can work with on the other end. So that's one that's in progress right now.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Right. We're gonna have to cut it there, which is painful. I'm sorry, but I promise we'll do more of this moving forward. Thank you so much to our speakers. You guys have really inspired everyone. I'm really enjoying following the chat and all the connections being made. I really appreciate everyone. I know it's hard to lots of competition for your time this time of year, and appreciate you guys spending it with us. I will, as promised, send out all these. I'll pull links out of the chat. make sure everyone on this call gets that in printed form or PDF format. And then we'll share the recording of the video as well. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and I'll send a note around when that is ready. And if you want to hear about future meetings, I encourage you to just sign up for the mailing list. Promise we don't mail often, maybe once a month, if that. So that's at the bottom of our main website page, of our homepage, in the chat. So thank you, everyone, and have a great holiday. Hope everyone gets some rest and uses this to have some good conversations with your family about why you love animal movement.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.